Hello there, Sarah from 17 once again. This is the beginning of my Kingdom Hearts Birth by Sleep Critical Mode video walkthrough. This is the campaign as Aqua. This is the first campaign I recorded, believe it or not. We're going to be beginning at the Castle of Dreams, but we're also going to be doing the starting area as well. I haven't put it in a separate video because it would have been very short and I don't really like it, so I've just dumped it onto this one. Because I think the beginning of this game it's kind of worthless, making you fight those spheres, and it's just not very fun. But Aqua is interesting as a character. She has probably the most overpowered evade. It's close to Ven's. Ven's and her evade is insane. She definitely has the most overpowered block. She has a multi-directional block, which means she will block almost every single direction. It's kind of insane and kind of amazing at the same time. And because she is kind of the designated magician of the group, I don't know why I said magician, like magi-ician, she's the person who magic seems to suit the most. She is the person who uses spells. And you'll notice in my Birth by Sleep content that I've been using a lot more magic than I do in Kingdom Hearts 2. And I think the magic system in this game is a lot more fluid and intuitive, and I like it a lot. I like the way you can have the decks complementing each other. The thing that it reminds me of is, it reminds me of Chain of Memories. You can have a deck set out in such a way that you have to press one button and it will go and cycle through your deck, and it will give you maximum reward for the strategy that you've put into the placement of things. And I think that is a genius idea, and I think it's really well utilised in this game. Additionally, this is a game where you have to use abilities to level them up, and that's the only real way to get them stronger. Which means using all your abilities is kind of mandatory on this version of Kingdom Hearts. But it's not a problem because it's really fun, and like I said, you can get some really good combinations, and even moves you didn't think would complement each other sometimes do so, and you learn these by throwing them on your command deck and just doing them. And you're going to find some really cool combinations that you're going to love, and everyone's going to have their own favourite combinations, and that's kind of the joy of things. But this was also my first time coming back to Kingdom Hearts Birth by Sleep in a very long time, so out of all the walkthroughs, this is probably going to be the one with the most heavy editing on it, because I was exploring a lot, I was looking around, I was getting lost, things of that nature. In the ones that followed, I was much more up to spec on them, because I remembered them better. I don't know if I've mentioned this so far in these series of videos, but I didn't play Terra's campaign. I played both Ventus's and... it's not Terra, what am I speaking about? Aqua's, sorry. I played Terra first on the PSP, and then I played Ventus's, and then I never got around to finishing Aqua's, so Aqua's was the only one I'd not done. And thus, when I got the game in the 2.5 HD remix, I decided to do this one first, because it was the one I was least familiar with. And I think Aqua's beginning is probably on par with Terra's. Terra's is probably the hardest. He has to take on that spindle wheel, you know, that stupid, like, what even is that machine? It's like a loom, like that thing that Rumpelstiltskin makes that lady cut her finger on. Whatever that thing is, it's probably the toughest starting boss, because it has a charge move that's utter fluent bullshit. The good news is, if you put your back in a wall when he does it, and you guard, it'll chain into your guard, and if you're in a corner, he can't get around you, because the nature of that move is, he tries to cheese you. And in a fighting game, it would be the equivalent of crossing somebody up, by using an attack. Blanca has an attack like that when he hops, even though it's technically not an attack, but it looks like one, so people are going to be blocking, and boom, it's on the other side. Gen has a wall jump that's very similar, where he shoots across the other side of the wall and does a dive kick on your opposite side. And that's what it tries to do to you. It goes through you with the attack and it immediately attacks back on you, and Terra's block only guards in front of him, so anything other than that is absolutely worthless. If it was Aqua fighting that boss, she would destroy it, because she can block every direction and it would never get past her guard. However, Terra is kind of the worst character, in spite of being my favourite. But look at that guard, it even looks cool too. Like, my only criticism of the guarding in this game is you can't hold it. There are so many opportunities where the guard fails you because the duration of it after it's reflected a spell wasn't long enough to reflect all the spells, and you were in too much recovery to immediately guard again. And it's little touches like that that I'm really hoping Kingdom Hearts 3 improves upon. But you're going to see a lot of Spellweaver. It's probably my favourite command deck. It's really easy to get, and it's incredibly devastating on bosses and group targets and single enemies. But the combat in this game is a joy. It's so fun. Like, I love Kingdom Hearts 2, but it's a bit mashy at times, and this game has the potential to be mashy, and you can mash triangle, but it never feels like you're mashing because you're constantly doing different abilities. And unless you've just haphazardly put on a bunch of abilities on your command deck, then it's not really mashing because each ability is there for a specific reason and you're using them in turn. Of course, at this moment in the game, you don't really have too much choice on the matter because you don't have too many abilities. So I'm just kind of throwing together what I've got. And because we don't have too many combo extenders at this point, normal attacks into moves generally have a lot more recovery than you want. That was an interesting guard by the shoe enemy. Kind of like a boot unversed. Anybody wondering too if I'm going to be doing the super bosses on this game, I will be making videos for them, guys, but once again it's going to be in downtime, which, depending on when I finish Final Fantasy X and depending on when Chaos Theory is recorded, because once Final Fantasy X is done, I'm going to start recording Chaos Theory, and hopefully I'll have that with you, because you'll notice that Birth by Sleep's been on a hiatus a little bit, and so has Splinter Cell. This is intentional, folks. It's not me trying to be mean, although it might seem that way. It's absence makes the heart grow fonder, and there's a lot of people asking for the continuation of those series, so if I neglect to give you them for a little bit, it gets you hungry as much as it gets you annoyed, and then when they do come, you know, it's nice and refreshing, and you can enjoy them more so than you would have done if they'd completely followed after their original run of the first parts of those series. And it's all about pacing the uploads. And at this moment in time, like Kingdom Hearts 2, there was a little bit of fatigue on the channel with it. The views weren't as good as they've been. They were still kind of the same people watching, but they dropped off a little bit, so I focused on Final Fantasy X a little bit more. Final Fantasy X's going strong with pretty similar numbers, and hopefully it'll continue to do so. And then I reintroduced Kingdom Hearts 2 again with it, and it did a lot better. Burnout is a real thing, folks, and unfortunately it happens a lot. It's just inevitable. It's just how it works. Like, if you start the first game, and by the time you get to the third game, it's going to suffer diminished returns because it's very similar to the stuff you've been watching for a while, so you have to try and mix it up. And at this moment in time, I'm using the D-Link. This is probably the first time you've seen me use it, and I'm not using it for any real reason other than to get my life back, but I decided to see what was different, and it just reinforces how much I don't use them and how much I don't need them. They're an interesting touch, but I never use them, and that's probably not going to change. This is one of those games where you're so powerful you don't really need to. Like, you have more than what you need with shot lock and your abilities and your command decks and the command styles. You know, it's one of those games where you're never going to be like, oh, if only I'd have done this, I would have done better, because it's just not really the case. And there's a lot of bosses in this game where if you know what they're weak to status-wise, you can destroy them. Absolutely destroy them, and I love that. It's a little reminiscent to Final Fantasy X in that regard, where certain bosses can be delayed, certain bosses can be healed because they're zombified. I wish all bosses were like that, where they had one niche weakness that if you found it, you could completely exploit it. I appreciate that would take the sting out of the difficulty and make it perhaps easy, but when you don't know something, it's difficult. When you do know it, it's easy. That's kind of how it works. Sometimes, even when you do know, it's still tough, a la God Hand and Ninja Gaiden and stuff, but it's a preference thing more than... And that brings us to our modding debate. I say debate, it's more of a conversation than anything else because it's just me speaking and you've not heard these videos yet. But I would love to be able to go into games that I love and make an additional difficulty. Like, imagine if you could make a New Game Plus mode for Final Fantasy X, where you took all your stats from your first playthrough into the next one. Like, just imagine, you max out every character, you get all the items, you get all the summons, you get all the weapons, you get everything. Then you start a new game, and you're introduced to the sphere grid completely blank, and you're able to power it up again. And instead of the cap for your attacks being 99,999, your attacks now go up to 1,000,000, or something like that. However, you're not strong enough to hit those numbers just yet, because you don't have the stats to do it. And of course you can get 255 in all your stats again, which will put your stats together to form, what is it, 510? And it'll just be like leveling up all over again, and the entire game is balanced and paced around your strength. Like, that'd be amazing. I would do so much crazy shit with that. Like, I'd have the accessories able to get another 4 abilities on them. So you'd have 8 abilities on your weapons. You would be so godlike. But then the enemies, I'd make them like sadomasochistically tenacious and nasty. Like, every enemy has, you know, the kind of status effects that the Dark Aeons give you, so you have to be protected against them. But at the same time, I'd like to give them a really glowing weakness. Like Unaleska, I'd make the bitch a zombie, so you just throw an elixir on her, or you throw a phoenix down and she dies. Or I'd make her vulnerable to zombie attack, so then you can throw a phoenix down on her. I think that'd be really interesting. Similar to this, the thing with games is, we all want to be game designers. Even if you don't think you want to be in some part of you, because there's something that you would change, and there's something that you think would be really cool if you could add it. Like, it always makes me wonder when we'll have the technology so that that'll not be such a big step, because I remember learning modding tools for Max Payne a very long time ago. I was in secondary school, so it's been a while. And you use this piece of software to essentially design your own rooms and change textures and change models and stuff. It was incredibly confusing. It wasn't intuitive for somebody who didn't know how to use that kind of stuff. It was kind of crazy. And same with the RPG Maker. As much as the RPG Maker was accessible to an extent, you still needed to use forums to understand what the hell you were doing with a lot of the coding and a lot of the stuff that you had to do for scripting, for programming and what have you. And then you move on 10, 15 years, and then you have things like Project Spark, is it called, where you're making your own games. You know, you have all kinds of advances in this kind of stuff. Even the new Smash Brothers has the ability to create levels. It's kind of shit, but it's still the ability. And then there's Hotline Miami 2 that's going to be giving us the ability to create levels in that as well. And I'm hoping to get really into that. I love Hotline Miami, so the concept of being able to design a puzzle of my own could be really cool. Chances are it'll be like most things where you really want to try it, and then you spend half an hour, you don't really like it, and you never go back, but you never know. That's annoying as hell, that. That's the game processing changing into the dimension link. You can pause buffer it to get rid of it. You might wonder why you would want to. The problem with that is when you're standing there, the enemies can move. When you pause the game, the enemies can't move. So if you're ever really close to an enemy and you go into a command style and it doesn't load, or you go into a dynamic link, or dimension link, sorry, and it doesn't load, pause it. That way you will not lose your initiative, and you'll be able to unpause it and immediately change. You'll notice people do it on the 2.5 HD remix of Kingdom Hearts, because there's a lot more loading on the drive transformation, and you're losing your window of opportunity. Pause buffering is something I don't really do too much, but I watched somebody do it in the speedruns at AGDQ for Super Monkey Ball, and he pause buffered one of the really thin ledgers so that he could get around it, and I suppose it's an interesting strategy. I kind of hoped he'd just do it and he'd be that good, because that's... You kind of forget that these people are people when you watch that. You know, when they're so good at one game and they do things that's insanely difficult, you just watch it thinking like, they're not even human at this point. They've transcended. They've become something altogether different. By the way, folks, this entire fight you've just watched me do, you can skip. If you're having troubles here getting one shot, which can happen by a lot of those fat guys if they hit you right, just run past it. You don't need levels for the boss coming up, you don't really need much of anything. The boss is tricky because he hurts you a lot when he lands, but I'm going to show you a strategy where that shouldn't be the case. And hopefully we'll take him out pretty quickly. But there's so much I would love to do, and it's just tricky doing a lot of it because there's a lot to learn, and there's literally not enough time in the day. I need those pills from American Dad that Stan takes, where you take one and you're as if you've just had 8 hours of sleep, or the perfect amount of sleep, and he stays up all night learning different things, like he learns how to use the internet and he learns how to play the guitar, and he's watching, you know, every single TV show ever made. That is my idea of a dream right there, because you could take that until you got kind of bored of being awake, because I think we sleep for more than just the convalescence of it. I think we also sleep because there gets a point where you get sick of being awake. Anybody who's, you know, had insomnia, be it preferred insomnia or suffered from it as an ailment, there comes a point where you're sick of being awake. You're sick of existing, I guess you could say. And I don't mean that in a melodramatic suicidal way, I just mean it in a... When you go to bed, you turn off, you go somewhere else, you cease to be in that moment, that present sphere, you're gone. You're dead, effectively, you are dead. Everything that we calculate as being the conscious mind is dead at that point, and gone somewhere else. We are what we were before we were. And then in the morning we wake up and we conveniently forget that we were nothing for a large amount of time. It's kind of a really scary thing to think about. I have one of those existential crises. But I think we need it, because it helps us selectively forget what it's like to be awake. We have that little absence from it, we wake up, and then we can go again. You know, it's amazing the power, the psychological power that it has on us, on our mentality to live. Like, everybody gets burned out on everything. You know, if you have to do something too much, it kind of starts to suck. And it's the same with being awake. And it always made me wonder with that episode, if taking those pills, if you'd start feeling that, if you'd start feeling like you're missing out on not being there. So, pretty interesting, but thank you very much for watching, and you take care now.